Hi, welcome back to another very exciting Copycat Wednesday here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez, and in this video I'm going to show you how to recreate the ADHD Joyner Lucas album cover in Photoshop. It's a really cool hands over the face double exposure effect. This is going to be an information-packed tutorial, so make sure that you stick around to the very end. And if you're new to the Photoshop Training Channel, just know that Copycat Wednesday is a new series where I show you how to recreate movie posters, album covers, book covers, pretty much anything. So make sure that you leave your suggestions down below in the description. Why don't we jump right into the tutorial? These are the two images that I'm going to work with. If you want to follow along with me, then you can download them. Just follow the tutorial image link right below in the description. Obviously, these are two self-portraits. You can use your own photos if you like. You can take a photo using your cell phone. All I did is just took a normal portrait and then a photo with my hands over my face. Now, before we get started, the first thing that I'm going to do is crop the image so that it more closely resembles the album cover. So basically the album cover just shows Joyner Lucas's face more or less about this crop level here. And I'll click on that check mark to commit the changes. And actually it's not quite centered, so let me fix that. Let me center myself. So you can click on the crop tool and then use the arrow keys on the keyboard to adjust the crop. And by the way, when you're cropping an image, you want to make sure that you have delete crop pixels unchecked so that you can do this. If you delete pixels, then you won't be able to do this. So you want to try to work non-destructively as much as you can. And I'll bring it down just a tiny bit, like so. I'll click on the check mark once again to commit those changes. So I have these two images. Next, I'll create a group and I'll call this group hands. You can rename a layer or a group simply by double clicking on it and just typing in the new name. The next step is to go into the portrait number 2 layer, the one that has my hands covering my face, and I need to mask out my hands. And you can of course use the quick selection tool for that and use a layer mask, but for something like this, I think that a vector mask will work much better. So I'll select the curvature pen tool and make sure that path is selected from the drop down in the options bar. I actually have a tutorial that talks all about vector mask, what they are, how they work. I highly recommend that you watch it. I'll place a link to it down below in the description. But anyway, I'm going to use the curvature pen tool and I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to quickly create these points simply by clicking over the image, and I'm going to follow the contours of my hand, and it doesn't need to be perfect. I'm going to go pretty fast now just so you can see how these vector masks are created. I can hold on the spacebar and click and drag to pan as I am making the selection around my hands like so. And again, I'm going probably a lot faster than I normally would if I were doing this for real, but I think that you'll get the idea. Let me just make sure that I get everything here. Once again, I'm holding the space bar to pan, and I'm just going to go all the way around like so. Once you get to the original point and you click, you'll close the path. And you can fine-tune the path really easily with the curvature pen tool, the tool that I was using, by simply selecting a point and double-clicking on it to create a sharp corner. And you can click and drag on points to adjust them. So what I will do now is just fine-tune this mask. I'm going to just keep clicking and dragging on these points, double-clicking on the ones that should be a corner. Let me find another corner so I could show you. I can probably zoom in into this area, like maybe a corner right here, double click and create a corner. So that's all I'm going to do now. I'm just going to pause the video for just a few moments so that I can fine tune the mask, and I'll be right back with you. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything that I haven't shown you already. All I'm doing is just clicking on these points and dragging them around so that they cover the edges of my hands. So I'll be right back in just one moment. Okay, I'm back. As you can see, I've gone ahead and refined my mask. And what I'm going to do now is create a group. And I'm going to drag that group and put it inside that hands group that I made a moment ago. And I'm going to call it hands mask. And what I'm going to do is drag the portrait number 2 layer into that group right there. Then with the hands mask group selected, I'm going to hold the control key on Windows, that's the command key on the Mac, and click on the new layer mask icon to create a vector mask. So the hands are now being masked by that vector mask. And the reason that I'm using the vector mask on the group and not the layer is so that that one mask could control multiple layers. I can throw more layers into that group and that one single mask will control all of them. So it's an efficient way of working. So what I'm going to do now is enable this portrait one layer, and I'll close the hands mask group. And we're going to create one more vector mask. So on portrait number one, what I'm going to do is once again select the curvature pen tool, and I'm just going to make a selection around my face. And this one doesn't need to be as precise. I'm just going to go around the collar here and try to get the entire face. And like I said, you can be more loose with this vector mask, and zoom in and just make sure that you're close to the edges. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be close enough. So let me just make sure that I have the edges here. And I think I'll double click on this point to make a straight edge here and click and drag on the path to create a new point. And I can drag out. But anyway, everything is looking pretty good here. Maybe I can drag this point out just in case, but overall that looks great. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. And now what I'll do is I'll create a group on top of the group called hands mask, and I'll call it face container. Then I'll press Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click on the layer mask icon to apply that vector as a vector mask on that group. If I enable the hands mask layer, I can click and drag that group in there. So now the hands will not show outside of the face container. So with this layer active, I can click and drag to position it anywhere that I want. And what I'll do is I'll reduce the opacity just a little bit so I can see the original layer, and I'm just going to make sure that the line right here in between both my hands goes right in the middle of my face. I got to make sure I get that right. If yours is crooked like mine is here, what you can do is press Ctrl T, Command T to transform. You'll see this transformation point. If you don't, then you can click on this icon to enable it and disable it, and just drag that on the line there. And press Ctrl 0, Command 0 on the Mac to zoom out into the bird's eye view so that you can see the transformation handles, and click and drag to rotate. And just make sure that line goes right down the middle of the face, like so. I'll click on the check mark to commit the changes, and then I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and then I'll bring up the opacity to 100%. Now, I'm going to show you what to do if your edges are too sharp. You see how the edges on my fingers are way too sharp here? Well, you can click on the hands mask vector mask and drag the feather slider to the right, and that will blur the edges. So you can blur the edges accordingly, whatever looks good for your image. In my case, maybe 1 pixel will work. And I could also do the same thing for the mask underneath that. You can see that the edges here where my hands are very, very sharp. So with the face container vector mask active, I can drag the feather slider to the right and blur those edges as well so that you have smooth transitions, and that looks really, really good. If for whatever reason your vector mask is not working the way that you want it to, you can always come back into the curvature pen tool, hold Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click to activate it, and you can click and drag on those points to adjust them any way that you want, like so. So everything is editable and it's easy to do, which is awesome. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. Now that I have these groups, what I'm going to do is work on the actual blend between the hands and the face. So I'll open up the hands mask group, and you'll see the portrait number 2 layer. What I could do here is just rename the layer so that I know what it's controlling. So I'll create one called blend, and I'll press Ctrl J on Windows, Command J on the Mac to create a new layer, and this one will be a normal layer. So I actually want the normal layer below the blend layer, so I'm just going to click and drag it down like so. I'll disable the normal layer, and with this blend layer active, all I'm going to do is change the blending mode to Darken, like so. And so that I can better see what's going on, I'm going to create a black and white adjustment layer on top of everything else. Because at the end of the day, this is going to be a black and white image, so I don't need the colors interfering with the decisions that I make. Keeping everything black and white will help you make better decisions with the blend. So again, I have the blend layer selected and I've set it to darken. Darken is a blending mode that allows you to look at the layer that you're on and all the layers below. Photoshop looks at the image on an individual pixel basis, and the darkest pixel stays. In other words, you have a pixel on top and a pixel on the bottom. Photoshop compares the two, and the darkest one is the one that we keep. That's how we're getting the effect that you see on screen now. And if I zoom in, you can see that the effect is pretty good, but in some areas the effect is not strong enough. You can see that here in the fingers. So what I'm going to do is create a levels adjustment layer and clip it to the blend layer by clicking on this icon. A clipping mask or a clip layer simply means that the layer that you're on will only affect the layer directly below it. See this down pointing arrow? That's what that arrow is indicating, that my adjustment will only affect that layer. And I can click on this center point here to adjust the contrast. See that? See how as I adjust the contrast, the shadows get darker, and that's what I want. I want more definition inside of those fingers, like you see there. Then I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and you can keep adjusting the sliders just to see what gives you a better result. You don't want to make the hands too dark. So I'm adjusting the white point here to brighten the image just a tiny little bit. And of course, all of this is subjective, so it's up to you how you adjust the image. What I'm going to do now is enable this normal layer, and obviously the entire image comes back. And what we want to do now is hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the layer mask icon to make a black layer mask, which will hide everything in that layer. And now I can paint with white to selectively bring back pixels. Make sure that you have a brush with a hardness set to 0 so that you can paint back pixels without leaving an edge. And I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to make sure that I'm painting with white, and I'm going to paint with white on my fingers like so. So the fingers need to look like they originally look, with the highlights and shadows. So I'm just painting on my fingertips here. And then on these areas, I can decide how I'm going to blend the pixels in my hand. Look here that I didn't do a good job in the original vector mask. So it's totally up to you if you decide to paint that out with a layer mask or a vector mask. In this case, I can tap on the X key on the keyboard to make my foreground color black to paint and hide those pixels. Totally up to you how you reveal pixels. In this case, maybe I want to bring more of my knuckles in. So I'm going to increase the brush size by tapping on the right bracket key on the keyboard. That's right next to the letter P in North American keyboards. I'll press X to make white my foreground color, and I can continue painting in and revealing some of the original pixels. Again, totally up to you how you do that. And I'm going to double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. Obviously, in your project, spend a little more time fine-tuning the image. What I'm going to do now is close this group, and I'm going to create a new layer, but I want the layer to appear under the hands mask group. Notice that if I simply click on the new layer icon, it'll create it right above that. But I want to save some time, and I want to create a layer below that. To do so, all you have to do is hold Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click, and that creates a layer below the layer that you're currently on, or the group in this case. And I can just call this layer Shadow. And with the brush tool active, I'm going to paint with black and make sure that you have a low opacity. So in this case, I'll probably have an opacity of about 50%. And I can zoom in and just paint in that area. And what I'll do is bring down the brush size and just paint. And notice what's happening here. The reason that you're getting that shadow on the finger is because on this layer here, I didn't actually paint with white. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If I hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the layer mask thumbnail, you'll notice that it's not really white. It's an off-white color, which is why I can see the shadow. So let me fix that. Let me make sure that I have white as my foreground color. I'll set the opacity to 100%. And I'll paint in with white on those fingertips. It's not going to be a huge difference, but it'll be a big difference for the shadows that I'm painting in. But anyway, I'm going to close this hands mask group. I'm going to go back into my shadows layer, and I'm just going to paint with black again. I'm going to reduce the brush size and just paint in the areas that I think should have shadows, like so. And if you look at the real album cover, you can tell that the artist painted the shadows in. Those were definitely not the original shadows found in the image. They're just way too dark. Next, I'll bring the shadow layer's opacity down, like so, because it shouldn't be so intense. You just gotta kind of show it a little bit. And then I can create one more layer, and I'll call this one contact shadow, to create just a strong shadow right on the edges where the fingers are touching the skin. So this is just a contact shadow right there, and maybe another one right here, and maybe one right about there. It's up to you where you apply your contact shadows, but to make it look realistic, you just need to have a really strong shadow right near the fingertip. So that's actually too strong. So let me undo that by pressing Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac, and I'll try again. And that looks much, much better. And I'll add one here. And that looks pretty good. Let me double click on the hand tool and bring down the opacity accordingly. So I'll probably leave it at about 30%, and I think that looks pretty good. The one thing that I'm noticing now is that the eyes and the eyebrows and a couple other areas in the original face don't have enough contrast. They're actually quite bright, and I need them to be darker so that the effect looks much better. So what I'll do is collapse all these groups inside of the hands group and actually make sure that the black and white adjustment layer is outside of that. So let me drag it out. That way it's independent from this group. And what I'll do is select portrait number 1 and create a levels adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below so that it only adjusts this layer, even though there's nothing below it and it really wouldn't change anything. It's a good habit to get into. And what I'll do is just add a little bit more contrast as well. And I'm not really concerned about the hair or the sweater or anything else. I'm just looking at the eyes, mouth, lips, and things like that. So maybe something like that. Then I can click on this layer mask and either press Control-I on Windows, Command-I on the Mac, or from the Properties panel, I can click Invert to make that into a black layer mask, which, as you know already, hides everything. And I can select the brush tool, again with a soft brush, a hardness set to 0. I can paint to reveal that adjustment if I paint with white, like so. So I'm going to paint in the eyes, the eyebrow, the mouth, like so. And it might be too strong, of course, but you can reduce the opacity accordingly. You can click and drag on a label inside of Photoshop to make an adjustment. You don't have to click on the drop down and adjust the slider. Just dragging on a label will do the job. So you can decide how strong you want that effect to be. Again, you're gonna have to do a lot of fine tuning when working in Photoshop. The values that I use are just a suggestion and they only work for the image that I'm currently on. What I'm gonna do now might seem a little counterintuitive. I'm going to disable the black and white adjustment layer, and I'm going to select the hands group, which contains the hands, of course, and I'm gonna hold Shift and click on the Portrait 1 layer, and that will select all the layers in between. Then I'm going to right click and select Convert to Smart Object. A smart object is a container where you can place one or more layers, and it allows you to make editable adjustments, distortions, filters, and transformations. So you can always come back and make changes. And what I'm going to do here is with my smart object selected, I'm going to go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And from the Camera Raw Filter, I can click on this black and white radial button, and it gives me the same result that I had before. And from the Camera Raw Filter, I can adjust the contrast, the highlights of my image, shadows, the texture. I can click and drag the texture slider to give it more texture, make the image pop, clarity, which is contrast and edge pixels, and that gives me a much, much better result. I'm going to press OK, and you can see the before and the after. If I actually enable the black and white adjustment layer, it won't make any changes, but you can see the before and the after in terms of the camera raw filter. If you think that the camera raw filter applied a strong effect, we can actually fade it out by clicking on this icon here, which allows you to adjust the opacity and blending mode of the adjustment. So I can just bring down the adjustment to 0 or increase it. Obviously, that will bring back the color because we applied a black and white adjustment, but we always have the black and white adjustment layer. So totally up to you how you want to apply the filter. In my case, I'm going to delete the black and white adjustment layer and just control the filter through the actual controls, not the fading option. So if I'm unhappy with the results, I can always double click on the camera raw filter label to bring it up, and I can use these sliders to control the filter. I can press OK when I'm done, and the changes are automatically applied. And let me know what you think about this technique. If you decide to create a self-portrait using this tutorial, then make sure you upload it to Instagram with the hashtag PTCvids. I would love to see what you come up with. Also, if you have any ideas for future Copycat Wednesdays, make sure that you leave them down in the comments below. If this is your first time at the Photoshop training channel, then make sure that you click on the subscribe and notification buttons. If you're already subscribed, make sure that you click on the notification button so that you don't miss any new Photoshop tutorials. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again in the next video.